Matt Stadland on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Let's leave behind then Syria just for a while, because I'm sure we'll come back to it in the coming weeks. And it's absolutely right. We continue to talk about it, even when it's not necessarily hitting the headlines, because it is the suffering unimaginable, and it goes on when it's not on the front pages of our papers. And yet our media, myself included, we seem to pick it up and almost toss it aside because we fear that people's attention spans can only take so much. But we're moving on now. I've already introduced this a little while ago. We're going to move on to Saudi Arabia, and whether you think actually that our government should be doing any sort of business with Saudi Arabia. Do you think, as Theresa May seems to think, that we are better dealing with the Saudis, that we are better, we will be more influential from the inside, as it were, than we would be on the sidelines? Let's just listen to our Prime Minister. She was talking in Amman, in the capital of Jordan, earlier this week. This is what she said about relationships with countries like Saudi Arabia.
Well, the May doctrine of foreign policy is that everything we do is in our British national interest. It is in our British national interest to have good relations around the world so we can trade around the world. That brings jobs and prosperity to the UK. It's also in our national interest to ensure that we are working with others around the world to maintain our safety and security. And yes, it is in our national interest to ensure that the values that underpin us as Britons are values that we promote around the world, and that's what we do. We are concerned about the humanitarian situation. That's why the UK last year was the fourth largest donor to the Yemen in terms of humanitarian aid, £103 million. We will be continuing with that. And yes, we will be raising the humanitarian issue. We believe it is important that we recognise the threat that there is in terms of people's lives and we will be supporting that through the aid and support that we give.
You see, I think I'm split on Syria, but I'm quite clear along the lines at which I am split. No more weapons sales, please, to Saudi Arabia, Mrs. May. But yes, or Miss May, yes, I think we probably could still do some business with Saudi Arabia, because I do agree with her. It's a persuasive argument that we can have more influence if we are involved. When I was in Libya in 2008, when that other monster, Colonel Gaddafi, was still in power, I talked about Assad being a monster earlier. Well, there's no doubt either that Gaddafi was a monster. Chaos in Libya now that he's gone, of course. But when I was there, I was with my girlfriend at the time. And I thought the best thing to do, because there were those who said, you shouldn't go to Libya, you wouldn't go to apartheid South Africa. What on earth are you doing going to a dictatorship like Libya? I was fascinated to see the country. I wasn't going because I wanted to have a luxurious holiday, but I was fascinated to see the country. And I also thought that actually, by being a Western face there, by walking around with a girlfriend who wasn't, and by no means everyone was wearing headscarves when I was there, but as memory serves anyway, I was walking around with a girlfriend who didn't wear a headscarf, that's for sure, and we held hands at one point in the street. I don't think that was a very typical thing to be doing in Libya at the time. And the reason I thought we could do that is because I thought, well, if people can see there is another way, whether or not they have free access to the internet, we know certain regimes around the world try and prohibit things like Facebook and Twitter. If you can't have access to the internet, well, you can at least have access to some tourists. Now, call me naive, say that's a bit egocentric to think I could have any influence. I'm not saying I had any influence over Libya, but I'm using it as an example. And if you blow up that example to the scale of Theresa May and our British government doing business with Saudi Arabia, you kind of get where I'm coming from, and I think where she's coming from. But do you think I'm being overly pragmatic? Do you think actually the best way to deal with this is to deal with it on principle and say we will not deal with countries like Saudi Arabia? The problem, if you do believe that, is that now we're leaving the European Union. We are going to be more reliant, we think, than ever on other countries. Take China, just for example. They don't have a very good reputation as far as human rights is concerned last time I checked. So should we just say no to all countries that we don't think sufficiently champion human rights, that sufficiently champion democracy? Abbas, delighted to hear from you in Redbridge. What do you think about this?
Hi there, good morning, Matt. I think when it comes to foreign policy, or really any sort of policy, you can either operate within the realms of morality and what is commonly referred to as, decent and honourable, which within a secular system is social consensus. Nothing more than that. In a religious context, it might be, what you might interpret, the will of God, as it were. But within the secular consensus, which is what we have here, it's as Theresa May said, whatever is beneficial to the British economy, to the British people, whether it's strategic or whether it's financial.
Well, hang on, you can be secular, you can be an agnostic or an atheist, and you can still have principles.
You can have principles, Matt, but remember, those principles come from subjective, a subjective morality.
So do religious principles, Abbas. So do religious principles. You can't prove to me. You can't prove to me that God is God. He's your belief. It's your subjective belief.
Well, Matt, let's deal with the secular sense of morality. It comes from social consensus. Whatever society generally feels at that time to be moral becomes moral. So, for example, you going into Libya and holding hands because you wish to show the people there's another way. I like you, Matt. You're a great guy. But I think that's a little bit arrogant, because if the social consensus of Libya is that actually holding hands is not considered to be modest or whatever, which I don't believe it is, but just for argument's sake it was, then it's a bit arrogant for you to go there and then think, well, let me show them a different way.
I don't think it's arrogant at all. I don't think it's arrogant at all, Abbas. I believe very much in values that I'm sure you share largely. And if you can go to a country that has very different set of values, absolutely fine to make silent statements like that. I do object to this suggestion that somehow you put religious morality on a higher plane than secular morality, because don't forget, your belief in God, and I assume that you are religious, Abbas, because we've spoken before, your belief in God is just as subjective as my decision not to believe in God.
Well, morally, for me as a Muslim, I'm not allowed to cheat anyone. I'm not allowed to sell arms to somebody who's an aggressor, who's a tyrant, who's not going to use it to defend themselves. There's all of these multifaceted reasons as to why you wouldn't deal with countries or deal with.
You'd have to be religious, though, to have those values, Abbas.
No, of course you don't, Matt. But what I'm trying to explain to you is that for a secular system, which is what we have here, to say something is inherently unjust or unfair would rely upon social consensus as a whole.
I'm fine with that, Abbas. I'm fine with that.
But if social consensus is that, well, if it's going to hurt us in our pocket, we'd rather still do it, even if it does cost many lives abroad. Now, clearly, you don't agree with that, and I don't agree with that.
Well, that's what I'm asking this morning. I'm trying to work out what the consensus is, or what people think in this country. That's the point of a national radio phone-in, so we can test the water.
Certainly amongst our politicians, the consensus seems to be...
I'm not sure you'll find Jeremy Corbyn agreeing that we should be selling arms to Saudi Arabia.
I'm not trying to imply that every single politician...
You talked about a political consensus. We are talking about the leader of the opposition.
Well, clearly, what we do have in this country is a parliament that could block certain things if they saw that they were inherently unjust or unfair. But
do you think we should sell arms to Saudi Arabia?
No, I don't think we should.
Do you think we should? Do you think we should do any sort of business?
Sorry, Matt, and I don't think we should sell them instruments of torture, which we do sell them. I think we've possibly stopped now, which they use on their own people.
Do you think we should do any sort of business with them?
I don't think we should give them intelligence information on their own civilians who they torture. One of my own uncles was tortured by the Saudis when he was working out there, and he's completely innocent, and I know that for a fact. So, we meddle in all of these different ways because it's in our interest to do so, but that actually causes the destruction often and the disruption of millions and millions of lives. And that is why, unfortunately, there was a time when you could go... Fortunately, there was a time when you could go into the Middle East, and when you put your British passport down with that lovely golden crown, the people nearly fell off the seat because they welcomed you into their country.
I was welcomed quite brilliantly by people across the Middle East. But Abbas, do you think we should answer this question? Do you think we should do... I'm with you on arms. And I think that it's perfectly possible, as I say, to be secular, to have a secular belief system, if you will, to be agnostic or to be atheist, and to think that we shouldn't sell arms to Saudi Arabia. But do you think we should do any sort of business with Saudi Arabia?
Look, we can't stop all business with all tyrants, because the reality is, we ourselves, if people wanted to have the moral high ground, they could stop doing business with us. Because they could say, well, you went and bombed Iraq, you went and bombed Afghanistan, you go and do all this meddling, you've created most of these dictators that now the world is trying to get rid of. which is what
we haven't
did.
created. I'm not sure we created all the dictators, but
well, I didn't say all, but quite a lot of them. They are the family of Al Saud were a British creation. You know, a lot of these regimes, like Saddam Hussein was again one of our creations. You know, these people were supported by us, created by us, militarized by us. And today, we're, as usual, we're picking up the mess afterwards.
So do you think Theresa May's got it broadly right, though, on business? Because I've got to go to the news. Do you think she's got it broadly right on business? Doing business with the Saudis, leave arms out of it, because we agree on that.
No, I mean, I think you can't stop business with everybody, otherwise people would stop business with us as well, because we've done many bad things around the world as well. Abbas,
good to speak to you. I gave you a bit more time than I was intending, because so many people do want to have their say this morning, but fascinating talking to you. 0345 6060 97.